Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
That's what I'd want. Thank you for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Alexis Halkovic, and I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today's date is Tuesday, April 14th, 2026. Panel time 9:30 a.m. The panel title is Power, Protest, and the Digital Battlefield. Now, before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder's, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you once again. Welcome to CWA and today's discussion. We ask that all, and I have to read these the way it's written, we ask that all our attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions, signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions, and are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Time will be allotted for questions for our in-person audience. So please, if you have any questions, look around the room. There are producers who are walking around who have note cards and pencils, and you can write your question on the note card and hand it to me. If you're a student, please make sure to write student on the note card. Okay, and so now I'm going to start with the panel. I'm very excited to have this really incredible group of folks here to talk to you about protest and organizing. Elena Gabby is sitting right next to me. She is a filmmaker, and I have to brag that she had a film that was just shown at BIFF at the Boulder International Film Festival called Jane Elliott Against the World, and it won the audience prize. Next to Elena is John Heffernan. He is a 45-year frustrated organizer who just made a movie about organizing, which did not win a prize at BIFF.
Next year.
And next to John is Abubakar Jamai, who is the Dean of the School of Global Affairs at the American College of the Mediterranean, and he works primarily on issues about the freedom of the press. And then finally, we have Srđa Popović, who's originally from Belgrade, Serbia, and he has been a lifelong organizer, and he runs an organization that trains movements with people from all over the world. And I am going to now hand it over to our speakers. So starting with Elena, if you could just say a few words about what this topic means for you.
Hi, everyone. That was such a warm welcome. Thank you. And Alexis is jumping in as moderator, and she's doing an amazing job. And she found out like 5 minutes ago that she was going to do that. So good job, Alexis. I'm feeling very humbled to be on this panel with the three of you. I come to this, I do not consider myself an activist. I consider myself a filmmaker who often happens to spend a lot of time with and following and uplifting activists. I tend to make films about people that I'm inspired by, and very often those are the people who are doing the really hard work, and I feel that my role in storytelling can amplify their stories and can help someone that inspires me inspire many more people. So that is kind of how I come to this. And I'm really interested in how the 90-minute film format that I sort of grew up with is transitioning into a much more short format digital storytelling space, and how the amount of viewership that I can reach in the digital space is really dwarfing the amount of viewership that I can reach in a traditional 90-minute space. When I think about seeing 1 million cumulative views in 30 days on short form videos, you know, and the effort that that requires, and then the same amount of effort is required to get 400 people in person at BIFF, which is incredible, and both are so key and so important. And I'm just constantly thinking about how to reach people with messages about these inspiring folks who do this work so that more of us can try to be more like them. And the format of that is constantly evolving and changing, and I'm very interested in how we can capitalize on those changes. And I'm also very aware of the perils of those changes, and I'd like to explore both today with you guys.
Okay. Hi. It's great to be here. I think this is my 5th year in a row, and it's really a highlight of my year. I love coming here and meeting you all and meeting you people up here, and the relationships that that I've developed over the years are really important to me. So, and Alexis, thank you for jumping in like this. It's not an easy task. You know, it's interesting. I do self-identify as an activist, a frustrated activist, and not a filmmaker, but I did make a film, so I'd love to be able to talk a little bit about that. But I was looking at the title of the panel, Power, Protest, and Digital Battlefield: How Can Activists Harness Digital Tools to Resist Oppression and Drive Meaningful, Lasting Change? To me, the most important words in that title are lasting change, because you can have the best protest in the world and the best resistance, but if it doesn't produce some type of lasting change, then, you know, what's the point? I had a crisis of conscience about 5 years ago that coincided with a milestone birthday of mine, and I thought, you know, I've been doing this work as an activist, trying to build power, trying to build movements, trying to affect change for 40 years, and so much of what I was doing 40 years ago I'm doing today. And I thought, why is that? You know, it's just like, it just came around, hit me square in the ass. Why is it that we're working on the same issues and so on and so forth? And I had an epiphany, and to me, it's that so much of the change has been focused on quick fixes and not long-term, lasting change. And for me, it's about systemic change. So I think it's important to talk about protest and resistance and power from that lasting change perspective, and that's one of the reasons why I became involved in this movie called American Agitators, which is about grassroots organizing. I think digital storytelling, everything else is very, very important, but in terms of really lasting change, I think you have to have that grassroots component as well. You need to get buy-in from people. You need to get that one-on-one. Otherwise, you risk that change and that advocacy being somewhat shallow. And so this movie is about grassroots change, told through the story of Fred Ross, who was an organizer in the Dust Bowl camps in the 30s and the Japanese-American concentration camps in the 40s, and then worked with the farm workers in the 50s. And one of the reasons why I think it's very relevant today, because it tells a story of hope that this person, along with many, many others, and it's never about one person. It's never about one person. It's about that collective power, was able to create change and was able to build movements and was able to resist in an effective, long-lasting way because he focused on that grassroots component. So that's one of the things that I'd love to talk about today.
All the time? Or? All the time. Okay. We're just discussing that it was a sadistic way to make us speak as little as possible, but...
Speaking of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for the CO Boulder community of hosting me. I do have now a multi-year relationship with this community, and I'm very happy to be here for the first time. So my quote-unquote legitimacy to speak about the issue of digital activism probably springs from the fact that I have been in another life journalist, editor, publisher in Morocco, and I've been working on human rights in general and freedom of the press. And I've been following what was going on not only in Morocco but in the region in terms of social and political protest. And what I'd like to share with you is not so much my insights, but my questions, the aspects of the debate that to me are concerning and requires our attention, and especially the attention of the American public. First, I don't think that social movements and political movements will die or live because or thanks to how they manage their digital activism. I think that there are deeper structural reasons that lead to these social political movements to spring up and to prosper or not. Very quickly, I think in the Middle East, to me, the big story and the most powerful explanatory factor of what happened and in my view, is bound to happen again, i.e. the Arab Spring, and with many different incarnations of the Arab Spring later in Morocco, the Reef movement, and then Gen Z to 12, more recently a few months ago, are the direct result of a seismic demographic change in our countries. And the regimes in place in the region have been incapable to provide this generation, which today is the most demographically important section of our society, with opportunities and with jobs, and beyond jobs, just freedom to speak, speech, the press, etc. And that's to me what explains the most the recurrence of these movements. So that's point one. Point two, and this is a big concern of me, is what I think is the lack of regulation of platforms. And I'm going to give you some very precise, elements that nurture my thinking about that feeds into my this concern. I had the opportunity to work with Meta, with Facebook, as I have been picked to help supposedly Meta to make sense of how they should deal with the Middle East and North Africa, and we're a group of people. My other colleagues were in charge of other regions of the world, and the job we had was a very strange job because we were supposed to tell Meta, Facebook, how they should deal editorially with our regions of the world. And it was a very strange job because Meta does not recognize that it has an editorial job. Okay, so that was the paradox in what we were trying to do, because for them, as you're aware of the debate here in the U.S., to remain under the protection of Section 230 of the Communication Act of 1996, they should not be perceived as being editors or doing an editorial job, whereas that's what they do. You know, when you receive the new news feed, it's because someone somewhere either had designed an algorithm that decided for you what you should get, or had directly fed you with whatever you get in your news feed, or whatever elements of the platform you're using. And the debate was, my position among this group was to say, you need to own up to this function that you are fulfilling. And interestingly enough, I was a little bit at odds with my other colleagues from other regions of the world, and especially with my colleagues who were working on the Western world, which was that they were mostly, and rightly so, concerned with hate speech and how to control hate speech on Facebook, whereas that was not my primary concern. Coming from Morocco and covering the Middle East, my primary concern is that in our part of the world, social media have become almost the only outlet of free voices. And so I was kind of a freedom of speech maximalist in that sense, right? And so that was the debate. Needless to say that my view has not really prevailed, because my position was that Meta needed to equip itself with editorial wisdom, and they started to do it, frankly, when they came up with this idea of this kind of Supreme Court, this group of wise people that would advise them on how to curate their most problematic subject on their platform. And my view was that they needed to have that kind, they needed to have many Supreme Courts in all of the regions, composed of people who are more attuned to these societies, right? And to help them make sense of how the information and the opinions they are feeding their users might have an impact, which, by the way, is a completely insane and thankless task, because I have been an editor-in-chief in Morocco, and I was losing sleep over how my editorials and the coverage we were doing would basically trigger some section of our Moroccan society. So I can't fathom how we can do that at the global level, So, but long story short, as you probably know, Meta did not pursue that avenue, and they basically, I don't know what they're doing right now, but what I know for sure is that they did not equip themselves with the necessary editorial wisdom to do a better job. And let me remind you that one of the reasons that led to Meta to initiate this process is because Meta was accused of having facilitated the genocide or the mass killings of the Rohingya in Burma, Myanmar, and I can cite other issues. Then I realized that one of the urgent matters on our hands, and especially because it's an American-based organization, is regulation. The worrying evolution, which is really related to this country's politics, is the prevalence on freedom of speech of the voices of the ultra-wealthy section of the society. And so we can talk about, I mentioned Meta. Meta had apologized officially because after October 7th, 2023, they have actually canceled many pro-Palestinian voices, and themselves, they recognized it, and they had to apologize for it. More recently, you've probably followed what was happening with TikTok. Now, TikTok USA is controlled by a group which is led by Larry Ellison. The first thing they did was to cancel the voice of a Palestinian journalist whose name is Bisan Auda. And what really struck me with this particular case is that Bisan Auda, who's a Palestinian journalist, is an Emmy Award-winning journalist. And to me, what's fascinating in this story is that the people who have decided that this journalist actually was worthy of this award are Americans. So it's really an intra-American debate here, right? So some Americans decided that this journalist was good enough to be worthy of this prize, and some other Americans said, we don't want her voice to be heard. Just to be completely fair, she was reinstated afterward, but with a lot of limitations. But we know for sure that many pro-Palestinian voices on TikTok USA had been canceled or limited. You know what's happening with Elon Musk? It's also extremely worrying. You know, his the fact that can have that impact on American politics by basically pouring millions of dollars. He's at the top of a fortune which now is beyond $600 billion. And now what's new and which is worrying to me, and hopefully this will, it's already, you know, a matter of debate, but would lead to regulation, is the evolution of the relationship between politics and money, and we cannot overstate the role of Citizens United decision of 2010 on these issues. And they have an impact directly on freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and if there is no regulation, then we are living through a period which will lead to canceling a lot of voices. Okay, so.
Hi everyone, Srđan Pop. Started my career in activism being a student organizer against a lovely guy named Slobodan Milošević in my country. We run a movement called Otpor, which is the Serbian word for resistance. Grew from 11 people to about 20,000 people in 2000. Wiped out the guy in 2000. Later I went a little bit to the politics and government. That were not the most exciting years of my life, but you sometimes need to try to change the beast from the inside as well. Last 20 years I'm running the organization called Canvas, which stands for Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies. We trained activists from 53 different countries, including some that my predecessor Abu Bakr mentioned, people from Arab Spring. What we figured out throughout this process is that conditions matter, and this is where academics will become angry at me, but skills matter more. So you can have the best conditions in the world, but if you don't have skills, how to turn numbers into viable movement, how to build a strategy, how to push through transition, then the numbers doesn't really matter, or the condition doesn't really matter. Fast forwarding into where we are now, we are exploring the 3 different battlefields, and I will just step out of what my co-panelist mentioned. I wouldn't really focus on a very grim world of one of these arena of social media. And looking into social media, that's arena number 1. Another one is financial restrictions versus crypto. The third one is AI. So we are witnessing the process in which we look at the activist learning curve to adopt and use tools versus authoritarian learning curve in order to prevent what they want to prevent. And it's happening in these 3 arenas simultaneously. First one, I think we lost. I think it's a very grim prospect that Twitter will become better at any point. Having social media starting as a tool of, oh, here comes everybody, and bringing something really good into the world of public mobilization, making mobilization organization faster, cheaper, unpredictable. Speaking of Gen Z protests across the world, it's really a good thing. Having it a place to share stories and narratives and all of this positive kind of stuff. Also making it a good tool for recruitment, because this is how you identify your potential supporters and then you can recruit them into the movement. However, with trolling, curating the content, and favoring rage and engage thing, it has basically become the main reason how the bad actors are not only able to maintain apathy in their environments, but also to wreak havoc in other environments. It is the Russian trolls that persuaded 30% of Americans that the vaccines don't work. So it's like the Sauron in Kremlin figured out how to use the Palantir, the internet, in order to wreak havoc in places where he wants his opponent to be busy. However, we are looking into 2 lines of this. One line is, of course, we can take a look at how to regulate this, or we can learn how to debunk the fake news. So it's like building skills with the people who are users is something I'm very passionate about. How you operate in digital space, how you don't burn down when somebody exposes your social media account, how you are able to push the narrative. What actions, like the frogs of Portland, can have the outsized power in this arena? Okay, so these are the things that you're looking at. The second underlined field of this is the technology of money, because the money is the breathing oxygen of this movement, and we are living in the era where we don't have money. We have access to our bank accounts who have our money. Okay? So if I have dollar bill, I give it to Abu Bakr, he gives it to John, John gives it to Elena, Elena gives it to Alexis. When Alexis has my $20 bill, it doesn't say Srđa Popović on it. So it's very easy to move cash, which is why government are making this particularly difficult. Why? Because they want to restrict access to the money to the individuals and organizations that will use it the way they don't like to use it. Well, welcome to the under-researched part of these things. It's a Bitcoin as a freedom money. We run the workshops where we teach people how to use crypto in the places like Zim and Burma and places of that nature. And this is how you are funding now the education of the girls in Afghanistan. So it's like it's really interesting arena to explore because it's so important. Lastly, something we spend a lot of time with now is the world of AI. And unlike the algorithm of Twitter, which can be shifted to whatever owner of Twitter wants, the AI operates in a very different way. Can we teach people how to use AI for good? Can we restrict the capability of governments to use it for bad? And can we build the AI engines, which is something my organization is doing now? We are now putting these skills into your pocket. So can you build an AI companion that can really teach you how to organize, mobilize, recruit, avoid oppression? I'll stop here.
Thank you all. This was quite a cornucopia of of content here. I wanted to give the speakers an opportunity to respond to one another. If there was something that one of you said that really made you think, yeah, I would love for you to ask those questions of one another at this point.
All right, can I start? Yeah. And I think I'm going to direct this to Abu Bakr. And I whispered in his ear, I remember reading that New Yorker article about 10 years ago that was this, for me, this real wake-up call that focused on the role of Facebook, was then Facebook in Myanmar and with the Rohingya and the genocidal activity that was perpetrated by the junta and the government there, that was largely or hugely impacted by Facebook. And I guess the question I have in terms of regulation, at the end of the day, you're always going to have bad actors, right? And you know, whether it's Milosevic or whether it's, you know, these tools put in the hands of these bad actors, how do you control that?
So the debate we're having right now is about regulation, and that's basically the crux of the confrontation between in fact the Trump administration with supporting the owners of the big platforms on one side, on the other side the EU, right? Because in the EU there is no section 230. So in the European Union considers that Elon Musk is responsible of whatever is published in X, that Zuckerberg is responsible for whatever is published on Meta, and the EU has some kind of a negotiation power because it's a big market, right? So if the EU can act to promote more rules that would limit the free-for-all kind of access to platforms, including this kind of hate speech, which leads to nefarious consequences. And this is a cosmic confrontation and debate that needs to be followed very, very, very carefully, because the result of it will have momentous consequences on the rest of us. I do think that there is also, and this is why I'm not pessimistic, I think that there is something very profound happening in this country in terms of public opinion. There are some major shifts in the public opinion in the United States, which have to do a lot with Gen Z, actually, on many important subjects. So that's one of the reasons I'm kind of optimistic. It's because we can foresee how what is now at the stage of opinions can become policy later through the democratic process of elections, etc. But I don't think there is I don't see any, and I'm not a pro-state, pro-regulation guy. Quite the contrary. I'm very, very suspicious of the state in general. But I do believe that we are in a situation where the power of the platform owners to decide what we can watch, what we can see, what we can read is unhealthy for a democratic society. And that the citizens in these democratic societies need to take action to make sure that these producers of public goods, because that's who they are, they produce public goods. The space, the agoras, the modern agoras are public goods, needs to be properly regulated. And by the way, we need to remember that in the United States, there was something called the Fairness Doctrine that lasted from the 1940s up until Reagan's time, that basically mandated that it was only for broadcast, but one of the reasons that people are yearning today for the newscast of CBS, the three big ones, and the fact that they were so fair, it's because they were also limited legally through the Fairness Doctrine. And so one of the debates that I think you need to have in this country is how can we reinstate something akin to it, maybe not in the same format, but something that would actually force those who are in charge editorially of how the conversation is happening on the media is fair enough and allows a diverse political landscape to express itself. And I don't think, by the way, that because that's the counter argument. The counter argument is technology has evolved in such a way that now if you are a serious citizen looking for different opinions, you can find them. You can go on Substack, you can go on, and I don't believe that the role played by the traditional press is being actually properly played by these new platforms, and I think we still need situations where you have different journalists around the table in a newsroom deciding what is publishable, what is not publishable, and they should be accountable for a brand. Call it the New York Times, call it CNN, call it Fox News, and because when they are accountable for this brand, it means that citizens have a tool to punish this brand by watching, not watching, buying, not buying their newspapers. And I think we need to be creative enough to come back to a system that will bring back the potency of this system.
I was really struck by something Serja said, and the reason why I'm struck by it is because it felt empowering, which is always something that I'm looking for in these situations, because I think it can feel so heavy and impossible. These systems that we're talking about feel like behemoths, and I think it's really easy to feel so scared when you're in a situation where you might be putting yourself out there, your voice. I think people have a lot of fear around speaking out, and I think that what I was interested in what you said is that it's actually a race with this new open field of technology between the authoritarians and the people. And when I've never actually heard anybody frame it that way, and when you frame it that way, it actually makes me, the people, want to figure this out better and more. And it makes me hungrier to learn these tools. And my question to you is, when you're training these activists to have these skills, how can we develop our skills and beat them at this game without them knowing about it?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is you can't. So it is not about teaching people secret skills on how to perform religious rituals in a crypt of the medieval world, so we can summon the god or the devil or the demon or whatever. I think it's making it open source is what's making it so powerful. The real defense of fake news is not found in some kind of cryptic workshop or a hidden activist app. It is the effort of Finnish government to teach 13-year-old kids to debunk the fake news. So making these tools universally acceptable, I think, is a long-term goal. Making people universally aware that, yes, they can use non-cooperation to defy their teachers, their parents, their superiors, their bosses, is a real empowerment. So it's like talking about these skills, I think we should make them as broad and as universal as it is. And I mean, I teach class covering these 4 arena on a sister university of CU, the one in Colorado Springs. It's called Technology and Movements. And I think understanding how technology impacts social change or government surveillance is something that public universities should be doing. So it's like I'm very big fan of making this knowledge as powerful and accessible, because it is actually, then it becomes cutting down the advantage that the bad guys have in resources. Whether we are talking the resources and money in social media platforms, where we are talking about the zillions of dollars that the Chinese government is now investing into face recognition, AI software, so they can take care of. So what about us investing into having this knowledge very broad-wide? So I think it's also, it's not only the activist duty to adopt, it is our duty to understand that there are public educational institutions that can become the part of this process. And I would go as early as high schools, because this is where people become heavy social media users. It's like teaching PhD candidates in this is not going to change things. Teaching my 11-year-old son will.
I'd start before high school. But it's like understanding what your opposition is on about and the power that they have with these tools, and therefore recognizing what could be done.
A lot of things can be done, I think, and a lot of things are happening right now. And I mean, what we studied is called strategic nonviolent struggle. This is the asymmetric conflict. And very often in these asymmetric conflict, David beats Goliath. And why so? Because David has a slingshot. And the slingshot is the skill to beat the Goliath. So not the numbers, not the size, not the muscle. So my question is how we make this slingshot more accessible to the people, and how we make more people aware that there are skills out there, that there are cases out there, and learn from these cases.
I have a whole bunch of questions. So I don't even think I'm going to be able to read all the questions, but I'm going to try to bring out at least the student questions. So I'm going to start with one set that says, what can I do as a member of Gen Z to utilize my power and engage with the rest of Gen Z to take action against fascism in the United States?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not Gen Z, but I have 2 Gen Z sisters. So I feel that I frequently observe the Gen Z, and I think you guys are incredible. I think one thing that helps me when I'm trying to figure out what to do, and this is why film is such a big part of my life, but it's like really looking at historical figures who were in a time that was maybe similar to ours with a completely different set of tools, but seeing their resilience and seeing how they overcame obstacles at that time, to me, it's incredibly inspiring to know that we are not the first generation to overcome completely ridiculous, insurmountable problems. And so when I made the film about Jane Elliott, who's 92 and who's a white woman from Iowa, but she's been fighting against racism since the day after MLK was killed in her classroom, you know, she's faced every single thing. But when I realized that there's been a woman doing this whole time, it makes me think that it's not impossible. And so I think the first step is knowing that it's not impossible, knowing that this has happened before, and also not being afraid to use your voice just because there's so many factors that are making you afraid to use your voice. If I speak out on this topic, am I going to be hired at my first job? You know, am I going to be able to get tenure as a new teacher? Like, you're starting out in the world, and these are the concerns, and they are so real. But the decisions that you make now are going to be the decisions that you keep making, and it's not something for later for you to start. You know what I mean? Like, this is a lifestyle that you can start as you're choosing your career path. How can I choose a role that's going to let me keep exercising my voice? How am I going to choose not to sign a contract that, you know, restricts my whatever? Like, these are just things that I would be thinking about if I were to enter the workforce right now.
My brothers and sisters are not Gen Z, my kids are. It tells you how old I am. I don't know if you heard about the Gen Z movement in Morocco, but one of the fascinating things, and actually I would love to have Serja's view on it, is that they use Discord. Discord is a gaming platform. And the reason they used it is because apparently it ensures the confidentiality of what they do. And I found that very interesting. And again, following up on what Serja said, he did not use the word, but what we are witnessing is an arms race, actually, between regimes and not necessarily only authoritarian regimes. You know, one of the things I wanted to talk about, but maybe we'll do it later, is how actually Western-based organizations are very actively supporting authoritarian regimes in repressing digitally their oppositions. Probably the most notorious case is Pegasus, which is this spyware designed by this organization called NSO, and that led to many governments in the world, one of them being Morocco, spying not only on its human rights activists and opposition, but also on political leaders. You know, for example, Emmanuel Macron, French president, and Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, were found to have had their phones hacked by NSO by Pegasus through the by the Moroccan secret services. So that's why am I mentioning this? It's because I think, and I'm going to repeat what I tell my American students all the time. I always tell them the following: the vote you cast has probably more importance on my life than the vote I cast. I'm not happy with it, but that's how it is, right? So our job as educators is not to tell you what to think, but to make sure that when you vote, your vote is informed, okay? That you have to be mindful of the consequences of your decisions as voting people in a country that has this outsized power. So that's point one. Point two is, in my August age, one of the few insights I got is that there are two qualities that some needs to have in order to, I believe, to fight this type of fights. One of them is a little bit of naivete. If you want to be absolutely sure and certain about the salience, relevance, and efficiency of your actions, you will never do anything. The second point is resilience. You need to be able to fall and stand up, etc. Don't think that because you're starting militating for a cause that you're going to succeed. Generally, it's hard, but just keep reminding yourself that that's a process, right? And even if you don't see the fruit of your work, you planted the seed. I can assure you that whatever efforts you make, you might not see the immediate result of it, but believe me, it will feed into some other process that will lead to good things.
Can I respond to that? I know you have lots of questions, but I think this is important. I think, Gen Z, you have the capacity to hit on it in terms of recruitment and use these tools that are so effective ultimately in organizing. But they're not always used effectively. But I do think that, and this sort of hit me with what's happening in this country vis-a-vis education, book banning, teachers not able to teach what they want to teach, and restrictions in terms of what is history and so on and so forth. And there are all these groups out there doing great work on it, but a lot of them aren't talking to one another. And I think the idea of building that collective counterpower and coming up with that sort of common denominator, that base, can be very, very powerful. And there are tools that certainly I didn't have at 20-something, but now there are tools that can help bring that kind of collective counterpower together.
I'm going to do a few questions at once and let you all decide which ones to respond to, because we have so many. I'm going to start with a question about how music was such a huge part of social movements in the 60s and 70s. And can you talk a bit about the role of music in social movements now? Also, can you talk about some 21st century activists across the globe that can inspire folks in this room, especially students? And also, finally, tools that young activists should be aware of that they can use to avoid being exposed and, doxing and all that kind of stuff.
It's a lot of questions. I will try to cut it down. Once again, people power is happening across the globe. Some of these movements are successful, some are not. What connects success is, I will first highlight something John said, very important. You need to know where you are going. Anti-this movements and anti-that movements don't work. What is the smallest common denominator, and that you bring different groups together? Then, second thing, exclusivity don't work. You need numbers. Numbers are mostly amongst the people you disagree with. So figuring out how to agree what is your smallest common denominator and how to disagree about the other stuff and agree to disagree about the other stuff bring us to Hungary this weekend, which is where, after 16 years, aspiring poster boy of a liberal democracy, Viktor Orban, who ran on a liberal platform. When I met him, I wanted to be Viktor Orban. Okay, that was 25 years ago. I'm serious. Yeah, he was the poster boy of a student organizer, anti-Soviet, blah, blah, blah. He turned into something very different. He was defeated by a movement which is like, oh, why? I don't like Peter Magyar because he's anti-immigration. Okay, that will kill the movement. So let's start with basics. We want to get rid of Russians. We want to get rid of corruption. That means that we need to agree with the people that we disagree on immigration. Full stop. You dislike this, you will never win. So here we go, understanding that the women got right to vote in this country by a very weird coalition of liberal suffragettes and super conservative groups of church-based women who wanted their men to stop drinking. Okay? Remember that? Well, this is how you gain success. You need to reach outside of your comfort zone and cooperate with the people you dislike. So these are some of the lessons that we can get. Speaking of movements, there is no lack of them. Taking a look into amazing job that Gen Z did in wiping out these big waves in places like, it's like Nepal, and then later in Madagascar and this and that. It's inspiring, but it's not really a good process. I would look somewhere closer to the home. I would look at why Parkland, Florida shooting is not researched as a case study on universities. So you have students in your environment which did everything by the book, understood that governor of Florida will never give them more gun control, target companies that are selling 80% of guns in Florida, namely Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods, Bass Pro Shop, using their leverage and power to threaten these companies to boycott if they don't impose the background checks. going after the NRA and the discounts they are giving across to their membership, targeting Delta, United. This has been done in Florida a few years ago. It ended up with NRA going bankrupt. Why don't you learn from your successes? Why the heck you need to look into Serbia and Burma and Madagascar and Morocco? So it's like my thing is like that there are things you can learn from it here. And this brings us back to the beginning. There is no such skill, such app, or such a training that will teach you if you don't understand that examples are all over you. It is the will to learn the skill with which the thing starts. Trust me, I don't know how to ride a bike. I will never learn how to ride a bike. It's so fucking scary. And, you know, giving me a lot of YouTube videos about how to hold balance and stuff like that, it's like the only thing that will make me ride a bike is a serious passion to ride a bike with my kids. And this is where we start by trying and failing. So understanding this is like there are so many good examples everywhere. It's whether you learn from them or not. And for Americans, there are so many good things that you can learn from your own history and apply it now instead of looking somewhere else and say, what we can learn from Iranians. Yeah, you can learn a lot from Iranians, but you don't need to look further than Florida or Portland these days.
Can I just say one word about music and protest and culture? And I'm sort of struck by the protest of today, and there seems to be somewhat a lack of that kind of cultural aspect that was so important in the 60s and the 70s with people like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Harry Belafonte and others. And sure, we have Bruce Springsteen writing that incredible song about Minneapolis and some other examples, but I don't see the role that it played back, and that really unifying role that was so important back then that it could play today. And I don't quite understand why that some of these people who have such incredible star power, as they say, wouldn't take that opportunity. Maybe they're afraid, maybe they're scared, they're going to be canceled or whatever. But I do think that it's something that can be a solidifying factor in terms of protest, resistance, power, et cetera, et cetera.
I just also, I love everything that you guys said, and I think one thing to add about coalition building and how important it is to find that common denominator. If you are lucky enough to achieve the goal that you set out to do not leave those allies behind. So the feminist movement is guilty of this historically forever. We get help from the black women and the women of color to achieve what we want to do, and then once we achieve that goal for the white women, we don't talk anymore about all of those other people and what they're going through and what they need because it's harder. So it's about building that coalition, and then it's not about thinking like, oh, these people can help me achieve my goal. It's like, we are in this forever together. And I just think that that's something that we have to always, always, always remember.
Thanks for those responses. I'm reminded of, during Occupy movement, there was this sense that this movement wasn't going to end, and there were older, more seasoned activists, I was a student in New York City at the time, who said as soon as they shut down Zuccotti Park, the movement is going to end. And I was like, no way, it's never going to happen. And it did. Yeah. And so one of the questions we got from a student is how to implement systemic change rather than these short-term wins that feel good, but they lead to nothing. So I'll leave you with that one.
I'll take that one because that's what the movie that I just made is all about. By the way, it's called, in the interest of shameless promotion, American Agitators. And it really focuses on that grassroots organizing and getting buy-in from the people that you're trying to inspire. And inspiration is obviously hugely important. And that passion is, I don't think you can organize effectively unless you have that passion for a particular issue. But I think a lot of that comes from the people with whom you're dealing with. And obviously you don't have that same type of connection with social media. It's about lighting that kind of fire that will inspire you to kind of create that change that's needed.
A few more questions. How do you inspire actual engagement and conversation rather than argument and people shutting one another down? What do you see in the future in terms of activism, AI, and social media? And talk about the role that you think the government should or should not play in journalism in terms of some of the issues you were talking about earlier with the freedom of the press, but also what happens when there's when we've almost lost, I think in this country, the fourth estate.
No, I think in terms of policy making when it comes to freedom of the press, there are many debates about, this is an important aspect that I'm not sure we pay enough attention to, is the business model of the press that is supposed to service us. And I don't think, my view is that we are at a stage where there is no winner. That we have different models. We have, of course, the private sector one that which is the prevalent one, but we have the publicly funded one, like what NPR is or used to be, or what have you, like the BBC is, the non-profit model, like ProPublica, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of policy making, at this stage of the evolution of the debate, the priority should be maintaining diversity of these models, is to make sure that all these models can actually operate in the system. So that would be my primary request to any policymakers working on freedom of the press, is to make sure that we have not only pluralism in terms of voices, because that's hard to achieve, because it means that those who are in charge of the state have to decide what is a voice, what is not a voice, etc. But I'd rather ask for the system to be able to create the space for all this variety of models. I'd like to remind ourselves of one very important change in the history of the United States that happened in the late 19th century, early 20th century, which had saved the economic system, which were the antitrust laws. And I'd like us to remember how it happened. It didn't happen because Theodore Roosevelt woke up one day and decided that's the right thing to do. It happened because a lady named Ida Tarbell, who was working for this small newspaper, who was not a major newspaper because the other major newspapers, the Hearst and the Pulitzer Press, wouldn't publish what she was working on, published investigation on Standard Oil. And that's how the momentous change started to happen. And I'm not losing hope that that kind of things will keep happening. So we need to, and it happened because the system allowed for the type of press she was working for was there. So that's why it's important to keep that type of pluralism.
I'm currently dealing with a lot of loss of jobs and work in the journalism and documentary fields. There are tons of Emmy, Oscar-nominated, winning people completely out of work. There's a whole other aspect to this too that I think is happening because of these mergers in these giant media companies. So not only are there less jobs, but there are also less people to pitch your idea to, less platforms to get them distributed on, at the same time that there are so many ways to self-distribute. So it's very confusing and complicated. And this is, to me, just another one of the things that falls under the category of stuff we need to figure out before they do. But it's been really tough. If you guys have friends who are journalists out there, give them a hug.
Yeah, there was a question about how do you reclaim that journalistic space when it's been taken over by folks like Joe Rogan, who've had a really huge influence on young men in this country and potentially the previous election. Okay, so you feel like you've run through those. Okay, so there are questions that are really, really huge, like how do we avoid, how do we avoid the fact that money in politics leads to things like Citizens United, also known as corporate personhood. And how do we reclaim the First Amendment now that we've seen this huge, very real backlash against protesters? That's not just a slap on the wrist. I mean, people are being detained in ICE detentions, being deported for having a pro-Palestinian perspective, even on social media. These are some of the questions.
If I can roll back to the question, what we can do in this thing to learn how to use these tools, and then maybe evolve a little bit into what you just mentioned right now. I think the grand lesson is to understand that technology is neutral, and that, for example, nuclear technology can be used to heat up the hospitals where the babies are born. In fact, it's happening in France in 70% of the hospitals. And it also can be packed in a little bomb and thrown on Hiroshima. So it's like so we tend to look at technology either, oh, we are super excited by social media, and now we are super depressed because Elon controls it all, or whoever runs the TikTok. We are very suspicious to this new thing called Bitcoin, and that may be a scam. So what about try it? How many of you are using Claude or ChatGPT regularly? Okay, raise the hand, it's okay. How many of you will ask Claude, is there a specific case of successful student struggle somewhere in the world where I can apply in US? Try to use these tools to give you the answers. And of course, AI often hallucinates. So it's very useful to keep some prompts on it. And you will learn how to prompt it. I taught myself to vibe code at the age of 51 when we were producing this AI. Now you can vibe code your own application for a price of $35 a month and not much work in it. So the beauty of this new technology and the promise of this new technology is that, yes, AI can be technology for the people. And yes, Bitcoin can be a freedom money, because this is the only currency your government doesn't control. So if you embrace it as a possibility and start using it as a possibility, you will evolve faster than you know. So instead of thinking of what will others do, it's like, I want to apply it, I'm pissed off, let's try to apply it. And at the end of the day, that's the final chapter of my book, Blueprint for Revolution, said it has to be you. So it's like you don't wait for Gen Z to do it, you don't wait for somebody else to do it, it has to be you. That's a little yellow book, yes. So my point here is like, in order to understand this, you need to understand that the fabric of democracy is participation. And you mentioned the question of, how we deal with this thing, and also you mentioned a very important thing, whose vote counts, stuff like that. Start by understanding the reality. How many people between 18 and 35 vote in midterms in the United States? How many? Ask ChatGPT. If you don't trust me, ask Gemini. It will give you the number under 25%. So it's not about bringing money out of politics. It's about bringing people into politics. Wider the participation, the less the money count. Why Orban lost elections was not that he only had a committed, united opposition. It was that the turnout was close to 80%. So with 80% of people participating, your money, your gerrymandering, your influence worth less. This is just the maths game, has nothing to do with the politics. So participate, encourage others to participate, and master the tools for participation, if this makes sense.
And I'm just going to say we've got only a few minutes left, so I would love it if each of you could give, take about a minute to give some closing comments.
My closing note is, do not obey in advance. Just because they're making us scared, just because they're making scapegoats out of people, if you are in a situation in which you are documented in this country, you are not an undocumented person in this country, you are not as at risk as other people are. So do not self-censor. Do not post it because, you know, you're scared of what the repercussions. Really think about, what are the repercussions? Am I equipped to handle those if they were to come my way? Actually, I am. Okay, no more fear. Let's do this. Like, until you actually tell me to shut my mouth, until you actually shut down my Instagram page, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna keep telling it like I see it, even if I make mistakes. Because I'm not about to just put my tail between my legs and like call it a day. This is America, come on.
I'm going to sound repetitive, but no, I'm not going to talk about my movie. But I do think that, you know, we cannot underestimate the value of grassroots organizing, that one-on-one, and the tools that we have to emphasize that and enhance that in terms of social media and digital communication are fantastic if used properly. But the role of that one-on-one and getting to know what your opposition is and what is needed to create that change can never, ever be underestimated.
My 1 minute will be just a reaction to what Sergio said earlier. I don't think, of course, we agree on the fact that voting is important. That was my main point. But we need to be careful about this idea that supply and demand will resolve everything. This Darwinian, I think human civilization is can be a great thing when we go beyond this Darwinian view of just let the system play out and have supply and demand and etc. So I do think that, first of all, yes, we need to start with political involvement and to get out of this, you know, this slumber that people think that they're not interested in politics, because if they're not interested in politics, politics is interested in them. So, and it's the version of it in the social media is, you know, is when you're not paying for something, then you are the product. So it's important that there is this political involvement, but ultimately I do believe that the system is running amok and that the citizens need to reclaim a little bit of control of what's going on by limiting the power of money in the system.
I will end with a quote from Ben Franklin, who said that there are 3 types of people in every society. There are those unmovable, there are those movable, and there are those who move. Be the movers.
All right, thank you so much, this whole panel, and yeah, feel free to give another round of applause. Thank you, and thanks to the audience for all these questions.